Welcome to Too Much Music. I'm Greg.
I'm Alison. And today, we're going to do something a little different. We get asked a lot because Greg and I have a bit of an unconventional relationship, I guess, according to some people.
It's true.
We get asked, like, what are you? Both of our last names are the same, yet we do not currently live together. If you've ever heard the intro to this podcast, you'll know that we used to be married, but now we just have this podcast.
Yep.
But we also have other things, and we're still super close.
Yep.
So, and we also just have an unconventional history in music, I think. And so we thought, well, should we do a podcast episode about, our past and how we came together, how we have lived our lives together, and how we live today. And I said, if you want to know how to phone in a podcast, just do an autobiography. You don't have to prepare at all because you know everything about it. Fantastic. Yep. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. So let's start. Let's rewind way back before we met. And Greg, why don't you just tell me briefly, where are you from? How did you get into music? And this is like a 2-minute, your life before me is worth 2 minutes of time on this podcast.
Wow. Okay.
2 minutes.
Boy, that's telling. And okay, so I grew up in the Midwest in a small town in Ohio. And I was doing music from the age of 3. I was a pianist from the age of 3, and it's very early, but there you go. And I started composing not long after that. So music has been in my life in an obsessive and complete way since I could really speak or walk. Yeah. Is that good? That's not 2 minutes, but
no, you still have a whole other minute.
Oh, sure. Okay. So the last minute would be that I took a billion music lessons as a composer. I learned every single instrument that I could, and then went to college and then went on to conservatory and went through my doctorate. So at Eastman. And so
and your doctorate at Eastman, you studied both composition and piano, right? What was that like? You really did both tracks, which is
correct.
Is that unusual at Eastman that composers do that? Well,
it's a DMA. So there's at the time when I was there in the 90s and in the early 2000s, there's essentially one DMA slot and one PhD slot. So mine's applied DMA in the doctoral program, and then there's a PhD slot per year, maybe. It depends on how many people are going through and such, but basically, yeah, it's a even split generally between theorist composers and applied composers is what I'd say. But yes, gotcha. It's a double degree in piano and composition. Of course, I did a ton of electronic music and immersive audio, spatialized audio, long before that was really much of a thing.
Right, because you guys had a super high-tech for the time electronic music studio in the basement, right?
It was in the basement.
Of course it was in the basement. They're always in the basement.
It was in the basement, but it had Next cubes in it. That's where we started. Those were our spatialization software machines. But we didn't really have a dedicated multi-channel listening environment until later. We did install one, but that was something that happened while I was there, while I was a grad assistant. And in some years I was responsible for the studio when Alan Schindler was on sabbatical. So yeah, I got to oversee all of that in a good way. It taught me a lot, and I still have that going on today, as you can see by the speakers behind me.
So, yeah. Okay, maybe your life before me is interesting enough to warrant slightly more than 2 minutes, because you did actually have a really interesting career before we met as well, after school, but before we met, what were those years like? What did you do during that time?
Well, so when I graduated, I did my DMA in 3 years, which is, that you just get brain fever. That was not a good idea at Eastman too. It was not an easy path at all. And so I overdid it and I needed a break. So when I left, I had been studying with George Rochberg. And so I moved to Philadelphia and became a professional musician, which just meant I was gigging and doing anything that anybody would pay me to do in terms of playing music or composing music. So I ended up doing a lot of work in theater and a lot of wildly different playing gigs, everything from, playing for auditions for musicals in New York City to I was the music director at a gospel church in Southwest Philly for years, which was incredible. It's one of the best gigs I ever had. So I just filled my days with music gigs, and I made a good living. Like I made a good middle class living doing it. Of course,
you were also a professor. I mean,
oh yeah. Well, there was that.
Sort of a little later, right? So you got a job, tenure track job as a music professor. I started as a replacement, sabbatical replacement at Dickinson, and then moved on to Westchester outside of Philly for a couple of years. It's something I did for a short while, but I left that because I had developed some the beginnings of some software that I wanted to take patents out on, and I couldn't stay teaching at the university and do that. Well, I could, but the university would own the intellectual property. So I left teaching because I had other ways of making a living, and I went out on my own to develop the software and the algorithms. And of course, that's when you met me, and that's the beginning of our story together, really. So okay, so screech, put on the brakes. That was my brake sound. It was not good. Screech. It was exactly the same the second time. Still bad. Okay, so now let's do me.
Let's do
what
you.
What did I do? Yeah. So I grew up in the middle of absolute nowhere in West Texas, a town outside of a town called Sweetwater. I grew up on a ranch. It is the most, quintessentially Texas upbringing you could really hope to have. I was a cowgirl. I did rodeos. I did horse shows. I spent pretty much my whole life on horseback. And in fact, I was probably about as devoted to that as you were to music. And at the same time, I did start music at a very early age as well. Started reading music as a tiny baby like you. I was not, and I'm still not, as dedicated a person as you in general, I would say.
Okay. We're going to have to fix that.
I doubt it. Good luck. I'm cool with it. I've come to terms with it. But no, I just I spent my childhood on horseback, and then due to some personal changes when I was 14, we moved away from that ranch. Personal changes. That means divorce. My parents got divorced. Moved away from that ranch. Went to a much bigger town in Texas that had a band, and I was in band, right? And so that was kind of the thing that I started doing in high school, and it kind of brought me into music a little bit more seriously than I had been prior to that. At that same time, I started writing songs, and I learned to play guitar at around 13 or 14. And that was a huge, huge change for me. So as soon as I started writing songs, I knew that's like actually what I cared about and wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So I went to the University of North Texas for music, and it was a really great experience. I got to play with a lot of incredible musicians who were much, much better than I am at performing, and I got to study theory, got to understand a lot more about music, and I got to take lots of philosophy courses and English courses and things that I love. So after that, I moved out to Portland, Oregon, where I started a band. And, the next 8 or 10 years of my life was really devoted to that band. It's called Voodoo Economics. And I was, kind of the main songwriter for that. We had, some collaboration on that front. But I was the lead singer and played all the instruments. It was ridiculous. And it was a really fun time. So that was kind of my... Oh, and also during that, I did start going to grad school for music theory. Got a master's, started a PhD in music theory and cognition at McGill, but realized even though I loved that program and it was so interesting to be in a lab, working on experimental psychology basically in music, I realized it was going to be impossible for me to have a job just because of the way that the market was going. So
this is actually a great time to pick up that story where we met, because I'm a little older than Alison, as you can probably tell, and just by looking at us. And when we met through a mutual friend, a conductor, composer, and I had already left the university and was working on my algorithms. I was
in the
developing.
corner working on my algorithms.
Literally, that's what I was doing. And I was, anyway, I was publishing and doing a lot of things but outside of academics. And I met Alison, and she was going to McGill for music theory and cognition. I said, oh my goodness, I need to talk to this woman. And so we met, and this is right when you were going to go to grad school. And you said, I'm going to get my doctorate. And I said, oh my God, don't do it.
Yeah, he actually said, I'm pretty sure I remember exactly what he said because it was so shocking. He actually said, that is the stupidest thing you could possibly do.
Okay. Let's all be glad that I've come quite a distance in my social, I hope.
The funny thing is, I mean, that may have been a slight exaggeration, but he was not wrong. It turned out, and I don't listen to anyone, so I didn't listen to him or anybody else. I did what I was going to do, which is my want. But it turned out, he was right that path, what he was actually trying to tell me is, the university is having problems. Academia is not what you think it is. It's not what it used to be. And that was correct. And that's why, basically, even though I was in one of the best programs in the world for what I was doing, I was going to be lucky to land a job in Oklahoma. And folks, I grew up in a shitty place, and I did not want to move to a shitty place again. So,
right.
He was right. And after a year of that, I decided, and it was a really hard decision, I decided to call it quits and head back to Philly, which is where I hooked up with Greg again, and we started chatting about what he was doing. And what he was doing was starting a music tech business. So he had this really cool music tech startup that was really right in my area of expertise. And so we've talked about that, so we don't really need to go into the details of what all that is. But basically, he created this incredible music technology that, without any knowledge of anything except an audio file, can listen to that audio file, parse its musical qualities, and then could have done lots of things. But what it ended up doing was helping find similarity. So in very large catalogs of music, you could use one piece of music to find another piece of music. And it was really interesting, really wonderful. I was so excited. And so we started working together. And it was, the first time I had done something for work that was cool and interesting. And that company, it actually just closed down. Greg and I haven't been very involved for a while, but at that time, it was a very intense work relationship, right? Like, we spent all of our time working on this company.
It's startup culture, startup life. So it was all we did. And we were, whether everybody had to do everything, we were all dealing with the technology. We were dealing with the scaling. We were dealing with the software development. We were dealing with the investors. We were dealing with the sales cycles. It goes on and on and on. So, and Alison and I were not exactly prepared. I mean, it turns out we're both capable, thank God, because this is not what we grew up knowing how to do. This isn't what we were really built to do or prepared to do, but we learned a lot along the way. And we luckily, we were connected with people who were very good at what they were doing on those fronts. So we watched them and learned a lot by watching them, I think.
Excuse me. Yeah, that was, I literally was coming out of like school and being in a band. I had less than zero music experience. And even when I was in a band, I didn't do any of the things. I didn't do anything but the music in the band. Like I very much, looking back, appreciate my two bandmates, for taking up the slack on that front. Cause I worked super hard on the music. I put in very long hours, but in terms of trying to get shows and trying to promote shows, I had no experience is what I'm saying. I walked in, I didn't know what I was going to do with Greg, and he was really great because he did what, and he hasn't really been a boss since, but he did what a good boss would do, which is he said, well, what are you good at? What do you want to, why don't you just try some things until you find, something that you like to do? And yeah, so I did. And we started, just schlepping the software all over the place. It was a really interesting thing to do. I ended up, having experiences that I could never have imagined having. But in terms of Greg and my relationship, we we just started spending all of our time together, and we were just working together. I mean, neither of us had any other thoughts beyond that in terms of like, this is somebody I want a romantic relationship with. Neither of us had any designs on that, I think, at the beginning at all.
Yeah.
And in fact, the most cliche, thing in the world is that we went to France for Meetum, which is a big music industry conference. And that's totally when we were just like, we should be together. And we were.
Yeah.
And basically, pretty much
natural.
after that, we were. Yeah. I really hate being involved in a cliche like that. Like, it's very un-me.
Yep.
But there you go. I was. France. Even me. Even I am affected by the romance in the air in Cannes. So after that, we literally spent. Oh, Scully.
We've got young Scully here. She wanted to be a part of the discussion because she entered the picture too, but that wasn't until just recently. It's okay.
Yeah, she's way down the line.
You're way down there, girl.
For the listeners, Greg is scratching a very cute black and white dog. She's small, so she fits in his lap.
Yeah.
Small but burly.
Yeah, she's tough.
Yeah. So we then spent, every minute together for basically the next 10 years, is the short story. Like, we did every single thing together. We worked together. We lived together. We tried to make music together, which was difficult, I think, probably because of the amount of time we were spending together.
Sure. And we had really both been traumatized in different ways from the experience that we had with the startup that lasted years and years. So we had been pulled away from this stuff that had been part of our life since we were born, and we were pulled away from it. We learned a ton, but then we had to come back to it, try to deal with each other in this new way. Neither of us knew what we really wanted. We had listened to so much terrible music in that time of the business. I mean, that's something that it's people on the inside of that industry would know about, but most of those aren't sensitive and productive musicians in the way that we are. So it wasn't just a side passing thing. It was something that got into our skin, under our skin, and into our brains in a kind of traumatic way.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was so for me. What did it? We were listening. When he says listening a lot, we were ingesting these huge catalogs of music and trying to tune this algorithm to output the results that we were looking for, which involved just going through result list after result list. So you'd go through this list, you'd have to listen very carefully, try to figure out what the software was hearing, which is listening in a really analytical way, and then going back, changing the knobs, in the software, and then do it again, and then do it again, and do it again. And it was like torture. Pretty quickly. At first, I thought it was really interesting. That did not last long. Pretty soon, it was like torture. And the other thing for me that was really hard was, I had, as so many young artists do, I was just under this complete delusion that, what I had to offer the world was totally unique. And listening to that much music, what I quickly learned was that it was not totally unique, and it sounded a lot like a lot of things that were out there already. And that was extremely difficult for me to process. I was, I would call myself just generally emotionally immature. Not today, but slow, like emotionally. So me at 30 might be like a really emotionally mature person at 20, right? So. Okay.
Well, there was also the fact that this is now 15 plus years ago, which is to say, actually, we're heading, it's like, 15 years ago or so, 10 years ago.
15, yeah.
So the point is, today it's a little more obvious how much music is out there. It's easy to expose yourself to just constant streams of stuff you don't know. But that was not the case back then. So people had a false sense of security, and it was easy to get by being you were in a musical community in Philadelphia. You had lots of friends. You toured your band. You heard lots of stuff. So you felt genuinely like you had seen all that was going on and you were comparing yourself to them. But when you started hearing the actual flow of data, you realized there's like 30,000 views or similar. Yeah.
And that was just an absolute ego death. And today I'm very, very grateful for that experience. I'll be clear. I feel much better off for it. But what it actually, the effect that it had on me, looking back and thinking about, my reactions, the effect that it had on me was that I literally quit music in a deep and complete way for about 7 years. As in, I didn't hook up speakers to my computer. I just didn't engage with it. And which for me was just bizarre. I mean, that's all I thought about since I was, a kid. And
probably the only time in your life you'll do that until you get Alzheimer's.
It just got dark.
it got dark. And for me, I had a similar sort of strange gap. In fact, I had been a performing pianist, right? I was playing a lot of music, a lot of the day that I was awake. And suddenly I would sit down and my brain would just say, go, and my hands couldn't do anything. It was bizarre. And I remember I also didn't have an audience. I didn't have like a place to put any music anymore. Like this was very strange. So I remember when we moved to New Hampshire, after we moved up north, getting my studio together. You weren't interested in doing any music. So I was, like doing my own little thing. And then like having to create artificial reasons to make a piece of music. I would just say, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to pull together these sounds and orchestrate them in some way and at least create 90 seconds of something. And I was trying to get, work my musical brain muscle to organize and to deal with sounds again. And I was hoping that would all come out and express itself in a new way, which eventually it did. But it took some time.
Yeah. So backing up, we after we kind of stepped away from the startup, we moved around a little bit. We went a few places, but we ended up in Philly for a while again and started doing just some like Betsy Basic technology consulting stuff because we both had enough skills to do that. And people started sending us checks, which was really great. We then said one day, like, why are we here in Philly anymore? What are we doing here? Do you like being here? Because I don't like being here. And I'll say, like, Philly's a great city. I have no problems with it. We both wanted some peace and quiet after the intensity of the startup, frankly. So,
yep.
My mom had been living in New Hampshire for quite a long time. I had been coming up to visit, and loving it for years. I think by that point you had been with me a couple times to come up to visit my mom.
I remember the first time or the second time I think it was the first time we came, and we were living in Philly, and we were caught in a snowstorm in that little Subaru wagon. And I remember like the trees were just towering, and we were on this road that looked impassable, and the Subaru was doing fine. But I remember saying to you, this is what I want. I want to live here. This is what I love. Yeah.
Oh man. That's funny. I had forgotten about that. Yeah. So we decided just to move up into the mountains, and we moved up to a really cool cabin, hand-built cabin that this guy made, and we rented that space for a while. And
I'll say too, I had another revelation in that cabin because it had no heating systems, right, except for 2 wood stoves.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to use a wood stove. You didn't know, like we didn't know anything.
No.
And so and we moved in like January or December or something. So
it was December, yeah, because there's always a period in New Hampshire in December where like there has been some snow, but not that much, and it melts. And yeah, we moved during that time, so we kind of got lucky.
Yep.
We got here, there wasn't a lot of snow, but instantly it just started dumping snow.
Sure. And we weren't prepared. We had to get wood together. We had to learn how to use the wood stove because we would wake up at 5 a.m. freezing and had to figure out how to deal with that. But I remember once we finally got that going, there was one morning I was up getting the office wood stove going, and before you were up, and I was out like in my long johns on the porch gathering this wood. It was like, it was freezing cold. The sun was coming up, and I thought, this is the life I want. Like, this is it for me. Like, I just doubled down. I knew it was right for me.
Those were not the moments that I remember as making me want to stay in New Hampshire, which I think is telling for our future.
True,
Yeah.
true.
Certainly 5 a.m. standing in my underwear on the porch would never be something that would make me go, yeah, this is it for me. This is.
I don't know why. I don't know what the deal was. I mean, I've never been like a manly man or anything like this, but now I literally split my own wood. You know, I deal with it all like at this off-grid cabin property where I am right now in this crazy studio with electricity and fiber internet. I guess I'm jumping ahead. Sorry, am I going too far?
Well, no, I think that's fine because I think that is kind of the next thing. Like, we lived in New Hampshire. It was awesome. We enjoyed it. But now today, you live in that kind of place, and I live in this, like, much, you know, it's in a small city in New Hampshire. It is, you know, kind of in a neighborhood. My house is very convenient. I get my wood delivered to me and it goes into a woodshed. Like, I do have a wood stove, but it's not. I also have a boiler, you know, like it's a very different.
In fact, you have a boiler and electric heat in some rooms, and you have a mini split in your office and your studio. You have it like you have it made. You have a push button lifestyle, I would say.
I do. I have a very typical, like, you know, Northern New England middle class situation going on, which it turns out I really, really like.
And I literally have a road that every time it snowed like it did today, like it's not going to be passable. I have this crazy Jeep that will get through it, but like nobody else can come down here. Friends who visit have to park at the top of the mountain and they have to hike or snowshoe down to the cabin. Like it's not in an accessible place. Alison just bought a hybrid car that she cannot use to get here for like 5 months out of the year. So, you know, yes, I'm way off the grid. It's a self-reliance thing, but it's peace and quiet. There are no airplanes. I mean, there are military planes that sometimes fly by, but like there are no airplanes. There's no traffic noise. There's no road noise. There's no neighbors. I can see no lights. The light pollution is zero. Anyway, I could go on, but I love it. And it's a completely different setup. Yeah.
Yeah, and I very much appreciate that that's something that you need and want, and that's super important to you. And you know, basically the way so when did we get married? We were married in 2013, which was years after we'd already been living together and stuff. So I think we were together for around 10 years, basically.
Yeah, basically, yep. Mm-hmm.
And then in 2019, Greg and I bought this house where I'm sitting right now together, which, as we just said, is like kind of a middle class, you know, really normal middle class New England life.
Yep.
And you know, we both thought it was what we both wanted, but when we got here, it was not what Greg wanted. And you know, it was hard, but we basically decided to just not live together anymore. And I think looking back now, it's pretty easy to see that should have been obvious, you know, that what we actually both wanted was to live alone. And I have my reasons. My reasons for that are very much tied into who I am, but also songwriting. Like, I have never been able to and will never be able to participate in my own songwriting process. I can collaborate with people, but as far as sitting down and writing a song, there cannot be anyone around for that. I don't care how much I trust them. I don't care how close I am to them. I need to be alone to do that. And I need to be able to be alone at any moment that I want to do that, which practically means, you know, I live alone and I love it. And I had always lived alone before. And, you know, I think that's what we both really wanted. Does that sound right to you?
It's certainly right. And that brings us kind of to now where we are musically together, because since we separated and started this podcast, we've also been collaborating on music together in the studio. And that has been truly revolutionary for, I think, both of us.
Yeah. For
a wide variety of reasons. But maybe you want to, start that, explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, you know, we had tried to collaborate before while we were married, as we both started getting back into music in our different ways and working more on building studios. You know, when we moved into this house, the reason we bought this particular house is because it had space for 2 studios. There's a basement space that we built out for Greg, and this space where I am is above the garage. And so they were very separated. we could each have our own studio in this house and, work at the same time far apart from each other. Again, probably should have been a sign, but hey, people are idiots.
Yeah,
Me too.
there you go.
But yeah, so we tried, in this house and before, we tried to collaborate, and we were just having the hardest time, just wasn't working. Like, things were sounding, just felt very strained. And I'm sure there were many complicated reasons for that.
I think part of it was we each felt like we had to be, this is important, I think we each felt like we had to be in charge of the process in our own ways. So, and we've talked about this on the podcast, I'm not a songwriter, I don't have that sense about me at all, I don't really understand or appreciate pop music. So that meant that when we were trying to do something together that was in that vein, you had all the expertise, but then I was the player and I wanted to somehow manage it and orchestrate it in some very particular set of ways, even though I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
So, okay, but we solved this, I think, and it's taken a few years of trial and error to figure this out.
Yeah, we now have kind of a way in place that we work together, and we are just about to release an album as our duo, which is called Dr. Body. And for both of us, this is great. This is my favorite thing I've ever worked on. And I've heard you say the same thing, Greg, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The music that we've been able to make together with this new revised process that we can share in a second has exceeded my expectations at every level for every reason. I love doing it. I love recreating it. I love working on it, and I love listening to it. I mean, that's just remarkable. It's not anything I would create ever, and I know it's not anything you would create ever either. It takes both of us in this magical way to even conceive of what we're doing, actually.
Yeah, it does, and it's been a really interesting process. I've never made music with anyone quite like this. I mean, my history of collaborating is mostly live in the room music making. I think yours probably is too, Greg. When you're working with someone else, you're just playing music at the same time with them, right? Playing an instrument, singing,
sure,
whatever you're doing. But in this case, we are going to get there with Dr. Body. We're going to perform live, but the actual creation process is a little bit different, and it has more to do with us encouraging each other, I think, to do things in the studio that are very true to who we are.
So let me just say what it is, at least for me,
cool.
right? Because we're alluding to it. Let's just say it. So the way that we've created a lot of the music on the upcoming album is this. I'm visiting Alison, maybe for the holiday or something. I'm in the nice push button home, not freezing, not dealing with wood stoves. Okay. So I'm there with Alison, and she says, "Oh, hey, I've been, tooling around in my studio and I've made some interesting funky sounds. Here's one, listen to this." And so she'll play some sound that is not a musical sound necessarily either, but just it's something, and it has something to it. It's got an interesting character, vibe, identity, or something. And I'll say, I know what to do with that. And I run over to one of her synthesizers and I start playing something. So she mans the machine, and usually Ableton now is how we're doing it. And she'll get Ableton up and running and start capturing some of the stuff that I'm doing live in reaction to that sound. And then we pause and discuss and but we don't really plan much. We just feel our way through it together. And I'm in her studio, so things are unfamiliar, but also exciting for me. She's managing the controls during those sessions, and I'm just playing off the cuff. It's a very instant, I'm calling it the katana swipe method. It's like a single gesture of creation. So whatever I lay down, we also are not quantizing anything.
Right.
We're not, this is important to the way. So I'm playing whatever I play is what's going to basically be there unless we scrap it, we do it again. So what we get is a one shot, and that becomes then when I leave after visiting for a few days and I leave, Alison now has all these stems of things that we talked about that I just barfed out, vomited out.
So I have this stack of really wonderful synth material, basically. And the way I recorded it into Ableton is I tend to use the Eclipse in Session View if you're an Ableton person. So this means you're capturing like little chunks of things. Sometimes they're long. Sometimes they might be 2 minutes long or even 4 minutes long. Sometimes they're 20 seconds long. But whatever it is, I have all these discrete pieces of music. Some of them are very much created to go together. Some of them are very much not. And then my fun is to, take that and turn it into a form. Find places. All I've really been doing for the most part is I've been contributing. Well, I've been contributing sounds at the beginning, contributing the arranging process. Getting that arrangement in place, which is really challenging actually, and then doing some vocals. So adding vocals, which is really antithetical to how I typically would write a song, and it's a really fun change for me to just sort of lay things into place. So I might write lyrics directly for the thing. Oftentimes I find things that I've written that somehow slot in nicely for me. It's very much a feel-based thing. I don't know how I pick it, honestly.
I'd say, so we've shared some of the previews of this music with some friends, and one of the comments that I've heard more than once is it's true for the drums and it's also true for the vocals, which is they're very clearly present, but they're never ever just there for no reason. Whenever the drums happen, which is not that frequently, relatively speaking, they are there for a reason, and they show up maybe 3/4 of the way through the song. And the same is true for the vocals. The vocals are not just there happening because that's what you need to do in a pop song. It's a very different feel, like more of a composed or like a purposed composed
through composed
sort of experience. Yeah. And I think that's
interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought of it till this very second, but probably, so I also do all the drums and percussion pretty much for this. That's the other piece. But that's not happening throughout, and it's actually not. Most of the time, if you're going to have drums in something, they're pretty integral to the groove of the thing or the feel of it. Like you would start with your beat. Or I don't know how other people do it. I typically would start with a beat, at the beginning of the recording process. But that hasn't been how this is working. There hasn't even been a beat at all until I come in later and add it. For some, and that's why, like, it's the same with the drums and vocals. I'll work and mold to create this arrangement, which is really challenging because Greg's rhythmic sense is very much his own, and it's not. I would call
it advanced.
Would you? Listeners, he's making a silly face. So
okay, yeah, I would say my rhythmic sense is very advanced. I mean, I don't know how to describe that. You can hear it on the album, but it is not what you expect. And yet I'm leaving it available for a more standard pop grid to sit on top of it, even though that's not what the individual parts are doing. And that's just years of composing.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fun for me. It was like a little music theory exercise because I would have to really count everything out. I would have to count the harmonic rhythm and figure out because you would change the harmonic rhythm often, in ways that I could tell that it was a pattern, but it wasn't a simple enough pattern like you would typically get in pop music that I would just know. It certainly wasn't breaking down into, 8-bar, 4-bar, 8-bar patterns. And that was really fun and a fun challenge. And that's what made it, that was part of what made it fun to put drums to, was because once I figured that out, once I had that in place and I locked it in my own head, then I could say, here is where we need to feel 8 now. Like we need to feel because when you've had something that's rhythmically complex or ambiguous, I'll say rhythmically ambiguous happening, and then you bring in a kick and snare, it makes it's like a warm blanket for most people. It just turns it into like, oh, I know exactly. I've liked this sense of discomfort, but now I know exactly where we are, and this is so wonderful.
I agree, and that's part of what makes it the result, I think, so fun and rewarding, because it stretches things out in ways that really, people say this about pop music a lot, and it's never true. This is really true on a composing, like on a pure musical level. There's a lot of ambiguity that comes. That is then resolved, and when it happens, that stretch, that tension of moving in and out of that of the regularity and the predictable expectation is really satisfying. I think it's unique to what we're doing.
Yeah, I think so too. And it was a really, like I said, it was such a fun challenge for me to. I mean, the first time we did something like we had a session like that, Greg left. He went home to his cabin, and I pulled the first session up. The first track that I was going to work on. Greg's getting dog kisses while I'm talking.
I'm getting licked by skulls here. It's okay. I'm okay with it. Hi, baby girl.
So I pull the session up and I start listening. And of course I remember sitting in the room listening, but it's very different when you're listening back and you know that now you have to put things together, right? Like you have to craft out of these bits and pieces a cohesive form. And I thought, oh shit, what have I done? Like what? I can't do this. But 5 minutes later, I had a solution and, kind of was off to the races. But yeah, no, I just could not be happier with, and the sound of it I'm so thrilled about. Yeah, we've kind of stopped talking, and this is appropriate. Like we've kind of stopped talking about our relationship and started talking about music. And that I would say is kind of what happened with us.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it's a natural and organic and very appropriate and very loving and warm thing that we have.
It is. And having spent all that time together, the trust and comfort that I feel with you it just allows me to be totally free with all that stuff.
Yep. And we are also extraordinarily efficient at working together through the startup. I mean, we just are. Like when we don't get along or we just don't deal with, no one's taking anything personally. We move along. It's a healthy, good thing.
Yeah.
Effective.
Yeah.
So I suppose what we have to do is probably wrap up and play out with a little Dr. Body.
Oh.
Yeah. With a little
Maybe
Dr.
Body. It's going to come in like right
now.
Now.
Yep. A little preview of something that we're up to. And of course the album will be followed up with a lot of different live performances of this stuff, which will never be like the original. We will have those like the point of what we're doing is to make it so that we can perform freely and openly and form and stretch a piece 3 times as long as what it was or whatever, and do that pretty quickly with Ableton and the push, the Ableton Push 3 that Alison has.
Yeah, so we will be on that tip. We'll be talking about it. We're both, putting stuff on our own YouTube channels about what we're working on. We're going to keep doing the podcast because it's a blast. Look out for the Dr. Body release. I mean, seriously, for both of us, this is the one. Like, we want people to hear this. We're very, very excited about it.
It's very much worth hearing. It's very much worth taking the journey. Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. It's been good to chat with you again, and we will see you on the flip side.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
I